Welcome, Charlene. Who do you think this podcast is going to help?
For anyone who is very dedicated to their career, successful.
A former big law lawyer who has transformed into a certified coach consultant specializing in burnout prevention and sustainable high performance. To a wellness-focused coach is truly inspiring.
Sometimes those two goals may feel like conflicting priorities. What they need is actually tough love. Actually, sometimes it's not the praise they need. Burnout is not the same as stress, which is often put in the same, but that's not the full picture. Or shit mindset of everything that you have to do. You don't realize that in 1 week, 1 month, maybe not even 1 year. But after a few years, the penny drops. Because you deserve it, because it's a treat, because you've had a rough day. Depression diagnoses are actually burnout.
Crazy.
Well, not really. Sadly.
Is it common?
Yeah, very common.
Welcome, Charlene, to AI McGarry. It's all about AI podcast, where we try to intertwine the topic of AI into every conversation. So we've had previous guests which were talking about the future of combat sports. Mm-hmm. We had Miss Universe talking about the future of fashion. We've had a dragon from BBC Dragon's Den talking about the future of business. We've had Simon Squibb talking about how to help people with AI. And your topic, I think, is going to be really relevant, especially now that people are starting a new year. Mm. They have New Year's resolutions that they've probably already broken. So if you were to summarize, who do you think this podcast is going to help, this conversation we're going to have right now? What kind of person would this benefit?
High-powered corporate executive, anyone who is very dedicated to their career, successful, brilliant, very intelligent, very ambitious, but perhaps struggles with setting their own boundaries or struggle with performance anxiety, perhaps struggle with sleep or other just general life hygiene and balancing family life with passion and career success.
Cool. So one thing I heard there is essentially as high-powered people have really busy lives, but also people who can't say no. Mm. And I'm actually going to do a bit of a shout out. My sister Kira is also a lawyer. She's in that corporate wheel of the law firms, and she's working super hard. She's always worked so hard. Weekends, late hours, the usual drill that you were in. We're going to go over that as well. And I think also, very ambitious people, they sometimes go after a goal so passionately that they kind of forget that they're human at the end of the day. So we'll talk about that as well. Great. Is there anybody you want to give a shout out to as well? People that you think need some help? Maybe you don't have to mention names. Describe what they're like, just so that the listeners can really resonate with the conversation we're going to have.
New moms, new dads. I think it's important. I've had so many clients transitioning into parenthood, and it can be both incredibly rewarding, but also hugely challenging, because when you love your new family and you also want to maintain corporate excellence, sometimes those two goals may feel like conflicting priorities. Mm-hmm. So I work with a lot of mom guilt, dad guilt, parent guilt, and I don't think that's gender specific. Actually, it's just a parent conversation, and just want to mention that. And just generally speaking, I'm a great advocate for male mental health. I think it's so important to do all genders, of course, when it comes to the mental health space, but very often men can be forgotten out of the equation, and it actually can lead to catastrophic situations. So a lot of the very, I would say, intense and very sensitive burnout intervention that I get into are actually often when a male client is on the cusp of suicidal thoughts or even has considered suicide. And very often for men, it can escalate to that place very quickly, because unlike women who would talk to their girlfriends or maybe hire a therapist a bit early on, men can feel a bit more embarrassed or ashamed to confide into someone, to expose their feelings, and it can lead to higher rates of suicides in the male population. So I just wanted to mention that, because I've had very difficult interventions last year, and I'm pleased to say that they're still with us, and they're recovered now, but it is important to mention it, I think.
I totally agree. I think men sometimes are taught to just suck it up. You're the head of the family. You've got to be strong. Don't show emotions. Don't cry. So it's really important to give out that message that, you know, men also need help. And also, I think, you know, hiring therapists is something maybe is very skewed towards females. Do you find that as well?
Absolutely.
Women contacting you more?
Absolutely. But what I find is that for men, coaching is more attractive. So very often, therapy can be perceived, and highlight perceived, as overly fluffy and sentimental, a bit like a comfort blanket, right? And that's not very attractive to high-powered men. However, performance coaching, which is really my domain, is a lot more empowering and attractive, particularly because that is the tool that is used by elite athletes. So we know that elite athletes get coached. And in my opinion, all corporate professionals are elite of some sort in their domain. Therefore, it's only the natural conclusion that if elite athletes need coaching to become the best in their field, why wouldn't we, corporate executive, need coaching to be the best in what we do? And that, I find, is a very attractive message. It doesn't mean, hey, you need performance coaching because you're somehow weak or failed. You need performance coaching because you are excellent and you're a rising star. And that is why coaching will take you to the next level. You know, it's very interesting because I've had the opportunity to work in sports. And when we work with athletes, the only ones that get access to coach are the ones that have star potential, right? So it's actually a privilege to get coached as an athlete. It means that the team, the sponsors believe that we can take you to the next level. So why wouldn't we see that as a privilege in the corporate world as well? If you get access to a coach, it means that you're a superstar. And we're going to give you the tool to leverage that potential and get you to be the brightest star, but without burning out in the process.
Yeah. I think you've said some really important things which are unsaid. I love hearing things which are unsaid. So some of the things that you didn't say, which you said, was, you know, men also need to have a little bit of a confidence boost, right? Like the way you talk about coaching is super attractive. I want to get coaching right now because, you know, describing the person as a high performer, a superstar, an athlete, you're doing well, but you could do a little bit better. You know, a lot of times when you're leading a company or leading a family, you know, there's not a lot of praise. And sometimes the only times you get any feedback is negative feedback. So sometimes, you know, phrasing it like this, like coaching, like it's something positive, take you to the next stage, you're doing great already, but let's make you do even better. It brings it into a bit of a positive light, which is good.
I love that you said that. And I was wondering if I could maybe just take it to a different angle. Praises, yes, but also the exact opposite. What do I mean by that? Top executives or leaders that I work with, actually sometimes it's not the praise they need because their team somehow behave in a way that is quite submissive because they have to, because people. They're the boss, right? What they need is actually tough love. And when you're in the coaching seat, you can have a dialogue with that person where they give you permission to not treat them like a boss, right? When I see a client, I don't see them as the boss, as the leader, as a CEO, as the CFO, as a CMO. I see them as a person who has superpowers and super struggles. And I'm going to go into both, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it or take little gloves to actually show where could be the struggles. And what I find very interesting in terms of feedback when I have those coaching conversations is nobody else can really tell me that. You know, your employee is not going to tell you that when you've acted in a way that, honestly, that was not your best self.
And also, there's a bit of a shame element as well, right? If one of your direct reports is saying to you, oh, you could have done that better, there is a little bit of, you know, that thing of, you know, if you're a parent and you disagree in front of your kids. So it's good to have an outsider to come in, kind of reevaluate the whole situation, say, hey, I think you're doing this well, this not very well. So it's really cool, actually. Let's get into the topic of burnout.
Sure.
Because I think it's misunderstood in many ways. And I think it's mixed up with other topics as well.
It is.
So what's your definition of burnout, being a burnout specialist? What is the definition of it? How people are getting it? Let's get into it a little bit more.
I think what's important to understand is that burnout is not the same as stress, which is often put in the same. Stress, or rather stressors, are a component of the burnout equation, but that's not the full picture. Burnout happens when you are accumulating immense internal and external pressures, often work or career driven, and you don't really have any system or tools to recover from that pressure in a way that is adaptive. Mm-hmm. Burnout happens when you behave or have habits to cope with the stress and stressors in a maladaptive way. What do I mean by that? It's quite rare that someone, unless they've been psychologically trained, will wake up on a Monday morning and say, darling, today I'm going to have a very maladaptive Monday. Watch me, right? That's not something
I've never heard that.
But if I tell you what a maladaptive Monday is, you're going to understand very quickly and perhaps relate to some of those habits. So it would be the alarm clock goes off, you wake up super stressed, you're scrolling through your emails, you rush through 3 espressos, you go straight into your laptop, you haven't seen daylight, you haven't stretched, you haven't moved, you're hyper caffeinated, you're not hydrated, your body hasn't been stretched, your mind is already on overdrive, you're really actually feeling overwhelmed by your to-do list, you're going into that oh shit mindset of everything that you have to do. You go through your day, you might get some kind of delivery because you want to save time, so you're going to eat hunched over your computer, wolf down your lunch without being mindful at all. Comes nighttime, you need to chill out, but you can't chill out because you still have your phone, so you're going to go to the Chardonnay or the Pinot Noir, you're going to be mindlessly going through Netflix, numb yourself to bed, and start again. So effectively, you're powering up on sugar or overconsumption of calories from highly processed food, and you're powering down on alcohol or mind numbing. Those are maladaptive coping systems. You think at a subconscious level that you're doing those things to cope with because you deserve it, because it's a treat, because you've had a rough day. So I'm going to eat an ice cream or deliver pizza because I've earned it, or because I can't be bothered to do something else. But what you're actually doing from a psychological and physiological standpoint, you're making your life way harder, right? Because you are not going to perform on Tuesday morning in an optimal way. So you've gone from optimal performance potential to suboptimal performance potential. And from a performance standpoint, that really can get you into the burnout wheel, because on Tuesday, you're going to need yet a bit more caffeine to function. Mm-hmm. And on Wednesday night, you're going to need yet a little bit more alcohol to chill out. But what you don't realize in that process is all those things that, help you take the edge off are also taking your brilliance off. You don't realize that in 1 week, 1 month, maybe not even 1 year. But after a few years, the penny drops and something happens. You get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. You get diagnosed with you've just had a stroke, you've just had a heart attack, you just get diagnosed with depression, or misdiagnosed with depression, rather, because very often depression diagnoses are actually burnout. Yeah. Or you're going through early perimenopausal symptoms for women, right? Mm-hmm. So all of this can be part of the burnout equation. But what people, in my opinion, really misunderstand about burnout is it's workload related. I would disagree with that. It's not workload related. Yes, workload has a component to play, but it's also lifestyle, habits, micro habits, mindset, and behaviors.
There's so much to unpack there. So the thing you mentioned about gradually increasing these things that you deserve, a little bit more wine, a little bit more coffee, or this very nice coffee of high sugar coffee you can get from Starbucks, etc. It does add up. I do see, I've gone through this myself. I see friends and family doing this where, one night it might be 1 drink. Then 2 or 3 weeks later, it's 2 or 3 drinks. And I need it to sleep. All these kind of excuses start coming up. I'm going to tell you a little story that I went through. Maybe you can resonate with this with a lot of your clients. There was a time when I was going through an amazing amount of pressure. I mean, I was doing something like 90-hour weeks for about 2 years straight. And all of a sudden, I just felt, oh my God, I feel so unwell. Like I've been unwell for weeks at that point. I was getting sick really often. And it was actually during COVID time this was happening. So I couldn't go to the doctors that easily. You know, the waiting lists were super long. And I bought, you know, a blood pressure machine. I bought a glucose machine. I basically bought a hospital to put in my house because I couldn't do it outside. And it was amazing. You know, my blood pressure was, I should be in a coma for the readings that I was getting. I was well into diabetes at that point for my glucose levels. I thought, my God, my body is going to short circuit. I'm going to basically die at any point. And I felt heart palpitations. It was just like everything going on at the same time. Couldn't sleep at night. And then I started realizing these micro habits that you mentioned. I was drinking because I had worked so hard that week, I deserved it.
Right.
I was eating sweets as a little treat, but I ended up eating bigger sweets. Sometimes I ordered 2 desserts, 3 desserts in the restaurant to try them out, but ended up eating all of them.
Sure.
And you know, a lot of the impacts that sugar has is making you more hungry. Alcohol makes you more hungry as well. You start consuming more and more and more. And I think I had gotten to a point where my body just couldn't take it anymore. And then that, you know, when I found that everything out, I finally managed to go to a great doctor. He measured everything and he said, look, something is going on. We can't really understand what's happening to your body, but lifestyle, something has to do with lifestyle, change it. And I was a bit ashamed to even talk about it. And then the next week, I just went on pure carnivore diet, cut out all of my alcohol, all sugar, ended up losing 10 kilos. My body felt amazing. No risk of diabetes anymore. Was sleeping like a baby. Everything started going well for me. So everything you just said now just resonates with me a lot because I've been through that. And I think a lot of people go through it silently or they don't notice it until it's too late and the cancer pops up or something else happens. So it's really vital. What is the difference for you between depression and burnout? Because like you said, it gets misdiagnosed very often. So what are the distinct differences for you?
It's very different because depression doesn't necessarily have the work component. So somebody can be clinically depressed for reasons that have nothing to do with work or career or workload. If we're being very careful about the definition of burnout, and particularly if we reference to the World Health Organization reference of burnout, technically burnout should only be used in the context of work pressure. Now, it's been used and misused and overused. People talk about parental burnout, political burnout, religious burnout, all sorts of burnout. I'm not saying it's necessarily a misuse, but if we want to be very technical about it, the World Health Organization does tell us that burnout is to be used in a work stress context only.
Interesting.
And that's, I think, quite an interesting reference point, particularly because it's coherent with the very first definition of burnout. The term was actually coined back in the 1970s, and it was in the context of nursing and medical profession. And again, there was this component of being of service and caring for other and the workload aspect. So I think for congruency and consistency, it is better, in my opinion, to keep burnout into the lane of the work and career environment. Clinical depression can happen with any other life context. Clinical depression can be driven by lifestyle environments, can be driven by personal environment. We have patients with clinical depression that are not working. In fact, many people are clinically depressed and are unemployed, right? So
That's
clinical
true,
depression doesn't have necessarily that work pressure element. Now, you can also be clinically depressed and burnt out. They're not incompatible.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to understand that burnout should be used in a workspace environment and has a very clear association with performance or pressure that has been mismanaged, right?
Got you.
So I prefer to keep them separate.
One thing I would ask is, there was a time in my life where I was very busy trying to be an executive, be powerful, running departments, companies, funds, all kinds of things. And during that time, I wasn't doing much at home. I would just come home and sleep basically. And one conversation I had with my wife was that, look, you're not appreciating what I'm doing at home. You're not appreciating what I'm doing at home. Stay-at-home mom type scenario. She was doing that to support me because we couldn't both be in jobs and look after kids and do all that stuff. And quite recently, a couple of years ago, and up until today, I take a very active role now. And I'm finally seeing, look, doing all the stuff with the kids, the drop-offs, the food, making sure the house is always in order. We have plans for the weekends. It's actually a lot of work. So would you consider stay-at-home moms to be a job, or for it to be? So where does depression and burnout fall out there for that particular category?
Yes, of course, a stay-at-home mom is a job. It's probably one of the toughest jobs in the world.
It is the toughest, I think. Yeah.
If you want to be really correct with the semantics, I would personally, as a professional burnout advisor, not allocate the word burnout if a mom is overwhelmed and overstressed. She may refer to it, but if you want to be technical about it, there has to be a career element. So yes, one could argue that if being a mom is a job, then it could therefore follow that you could be a burnt out mom, right? But I think we're just perhaps losing the...
Of course. I'm only going to the semantics is because different generations see the word depression in a very negative way.
Sure,
so but baby boomers, for instance, if you say depressed, they're like, come on, we used to be in the war, we have no time to be depressed, and then if you go to younger generations, depressed, if you're depressed is a serious word, it's respected. So how do you see that in terms of different generations?
I think there is definitely a difference, but I think perhaps more importantly is how frequent, sadly, depression is misdiagnosed. So I'm particularly passionate about that topic because I've seen the impact, especially for high-powered corporate executives. So just recently, I had a client that had been diagnosed by a GP as depressed, and the GP diagnosed that person without running any blood work. And
crazy.
Well, not really. Sadly.
Is it common?
Yeah, very common. Turns out we ran a blood panel and she was right in the middle of perimenopause and into menopause, really, according to her blood work. So what she was really experiencing was not depression, was perimenopause and menopause-driven symptoms. Yeah.
And hormones can do crazy things to your body.
Well, they can really feel like, sound like depression. That's not to say that there may not be a depression component to perimenopause and menopause, but I think it's important to be very holistic. And I always err on the side of caution when a client comes to me after having been labeled depressed. I question it, I investigate it. It may be correct, you may be clinically depressed, but I want to put my investigator hat on. Maybe that's the former litigator inside me, but I want to know that that's indeed the case and it's not something else. Another example is one of my clients, very high-powered executive who has also been diagnosed as clinically depressed, no blood work, cortisol up the roof, vitamin B12 deficient, vitamin D deficient, right? Those are clear indicators of stressors being very elevated and lifestyle, right? You're vitamin D deficient when you're spending a huge amount of time indoors and you're not getting exposed to sunlight. And he had experience with vegan/vegetarian diet and was actually reducing his protein intake, which had affected his iron and B12 level. Now, with 3 months of holistic lifestyle adjustment, we did his blood panel again and everything had gone back to normal. Vitamin D supplementation,
amazing,
protein-based diet, and guess what? He was not feeling any of the depression symptoms. Was that person clinically depressed in the first day? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
Right? So I just think let's take a step back. Doctors, I love them. I have a huge amount of respect. I go to the doctor. But what I wanted to do is just to question the approach. Are we being holistic? Are we doing all the blood panels that we can? It's just something that's always struck me is if you're a CEO and you want to see how your company works, you're going to go down and you're going to see all the ins and outs, and you're going to go explore the bottom sheet, and you want to see the profits, and you want to see the loss, and you want to see everything. You want to have data point, and you want to make sure that you have a full picture and you're not missing anything. Are you doing that with your health? Are you taking that approach?
Yeah. And everybody has goals, right? To make X amount of money and X amount of customers, but what's their goals for their health, basically?
Yeah. So I would say just take actually any professional's advice with a pinch of salt, being your doctor, your coach, your therapist. We're not all knowing. I'm not. I'm sure I've made, errors in the past. I would urge and invite my client to investigate the findings and actually just realize that your health is your responsibility and your sovereignty, and it's important to take a second opinion, double check, be really investigative. And very often, lifestyle is sadly not taken into consideration by doctors. Doctors very often don't ask you how you sleep, which amazes me. What do you eat? Not ask. How do you sleep? How do you move? Are you active? Not asked. And if you ask a doctor, they'll tell you they haven't been trained.
Crazy.
Right? So again, huge respect for the profession. I'm not at all. There are excellent doctors out there, but the approach should be just take the diagnosis and question it.
I'm going to ask you a very serious question now. Is there ever a time where it's been too late, that you have seen that the person just didn't take your advice, there was an intervention in time, and they died, or something very serious happened to them?
I've had clients died, but it's not necessarily because they didn't take the advice seriously. It's often because the condition was too severe. So I've lost clients to cancer. I've lost clients to a stroke. You can do a lot of lifestyle adjustment, but if there's been years and decades of different lifestyle that have compounded, we're not gods, right? We can prolong the life of our clients and patients, but if there is an underlying very serious medical condition, sometimes it can be a little bit too late. So that's why I would say the message should always be to not wait for that first health event. So the reason I became passionate about the world of burnout is because I saw my dad have a burnout-driven heart attack. And that's when my whole world changed. In an ideal world, you would want to not wait for the first heart attack. You would want to not wait for the first stroke because you're more likely to have a second one and a third one, right? You would not want to wait for the type 2 diabetes diagnosis, or not wait for the cancer diabetes. Let me start again. Not wait for the cancer diagnosis, but very often, and I include myself, we wait to see that catastrophic event unfold to make a change. I waited as well, way too long, and I was diagnosed as insomniac. I had a general anxiety disorder. I was dependent on painkillers. I was taking all sorts of medication for my sleep. I was in a very unhealthy place. I was addicted to work. I wasn't addicted to other substances other than painkillers and sleep medication, but I was definitely...
You passed out in the taxi, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
So walk through your life a little bit at that point. Maybe some people can resonate. Like, what were you doing those weeks and months that led up to you passing out, and how was it? What were you doing? What were you eating? How were you sleeping? How much were you working?
All of the above, everything that I've mentioned about maladaptive behavior. I was the queen bee of maladaptive behavior, but I had no idea, right? So I was brought up in a family where intellectual excellence was always praised and always the goal, be the best, be the first, top of the class, Oxbridge, top law firm. So, and I'm grateful. I don't want to sound ungrateful. My parents invested in a beautiful education, and I had a very privileged childhood. And my father was my hero, and I just wanted to be like him, as successful, as driven, as powerful. And I guess in many ways, one could say I did that, but I completely disregarded everything else. So I was not just obsessed with work, I was addicted to work. More specifically, it's not work you're addicted to, it's the reward. Like any addiction, right? It's never the substance, it's what the substance does to you.
Yeah.
So for work, if we consider work to be a substance, which I do consider work to be a substance, perhaps one of the most addictive one, because unlike other substances, it's the one that is praised by society. So not many people will tell you, oh, wow, you're an alcoholic. Well done, you. Have a whiskey on me, right?
Well, if you have a friend like that, you should get rid of them.
Right, that will be an enabler. Yeah. But that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're struggling with drugs, you will find people that want to be your allies, or they will recommend rehab. There is a certain element of almost, at a societal level, we know that there is a boundary around it, and we know that's potentially categorized as a not healthy behavior.
Yeah.
But how often do you have a colleague that tells you, hey, mate, you should really slow down here? How often do you have your boss say, hey, you are over your performance, you work 90 hours, just take a week off on me, right? Yeah. It's often the opposite. It's, you're great at what you do, let me raise the bar. You want this promotion? Let me raise the bar. You want this bonus? Let's raise the bar. You've done those hours this year? Let's double and let's do a comp base and let's increase the bonus. There is always the carrot and there is always the stick. The carrot is money, power, accolades, and we all want that. It's a very ego-driven pursuit. And it's not bad or good. I would use neutral language. It's just human. I wanted all of those things. And it's the carrot, right? But then there is the stick. It's, well, if I don't continue to pursue, how am I going to pay for that mortgage? Because now I bought the most expensive house based on that super high salary and based on that bonus that I haven't earned yet, but I've put myself in debt. So that's the stick. I can't not work those hours. And yes, my boss is a bit crazy or a bit of a workaholic himself or herself too. But if I don't keep up that job, then I'm going to lose out on my mortgage. So the stick is actually the fear. And then you get often a bit brainwashed with any team that you work with. And you believe that that's become a bit of a godlike culture where you become quite submissive to that environment and you think you normalize what your peer do. And there is peer pressure, right? So that can actually be quite an intense and dark place to navigate because you lose perspective on those behavior. And we've touched upon alcohol and drugs and substances, but the biggest thing that my work addiction cost me is my personal life. It cost me a marriage. I was married quite young and I was divorced quite young because when you're never home, it's quite hard to keep a marriage up.
Yeah.
My first love was my work. My primary husband was my work, right? The rest was a sort of side entertainment that I neglected.
Makes sense. And by the way, a little bit of Australian accent came out for 1 second with
the
mate.
Oh, God.
With mate. I thought you were going to say down under mate or something. Good day, mate.
Oh, no. Did it come out? I'm sorry.
She just flew in from Australia to do other things, obviously, not just to see me, but just flew in from Australia last night.
Last night, yes.
So you mentioned something really important there, which is, so two things, so many things I want to ask you. Do you feel from your experience with different clients that it's more pressure when they come from a poor background and they want to prove everybody wrong? That typical scenario of I'm going to make it because nobody in my family has done it. I'm going to be the first to go to university, etc. Or is there more pressure when you come from a background where, very successful family and you want to be able to show them that you're just as good as them, that you make them proud? Out of those two scenarios, which one do you think creates the most likelihood for burnout?
First of all, I just want to say what a brilliant question because I really love it. And I'm currently deep in the manuscript of my book where I reveal archetypes of burnout and I actually use the story of those two archetypes specifically. And the reason I say it's brilliant that you've asked is in my experience, you can't really scale it. In other words, there isn't one that has it easier or worse than the other. Yeah. Pressure is pressure. So I come from the camp of, because I came from excellence in a way with my dad. There was that pressure to be as good as, and that pressure to be the best. But when you come from an unprivileged background, it can be a huge amount of pressure to raise up to that. And also there is that element of being the provider.
Yeah.
So a lot of my clients that are navigating burnout either come from very privileged background where they want to keep that up and raise the bar, or they actually want to step into the shoes of being the providers for their family that may need access to resources. So I've had clients that needed to support their sisters, their brothers, their father, their mother, their whole family financially and emotionally, because their family members were not in a place where they could sustain themselves, and that person had to be a resource, which adds another element of pressure, right?
Yeah, huge.
And I don't think it would be fair or appropriate to say, oh, that pressure is worse than that pressure.
Yeah.
Pressure is pressure. Performance is performance, and burnout is burnout. It hits us all, and in a way, I think that what is both extraordinary and scary about burnout is it doesn't discriminate. It can hit us all, coming from any kind of background, at the same level and have the same effect. And that is super interesting from a psychological standpoint.
Just to give you an interesting thing, you maybe want to add to your book, I actually have both of those. So came from a very successful, actually very humble beginnings. Then my family became very successful. And it just as I was about to start to take over, we lost everything. So that had to then become the provider, and then all of that happened. So massive yo-yo of a life. We should go through that later as well. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about is also personality traits. Because at least in my experience, maybe I have a very limited experience in this subject, but I've noticed that different types of people will experience burnout more likely or more intensely. So it's a bit like that that story you hear of, what's the difference between Batman and the Joker, right? The superhero and the villain. They essentially came from hard backgrounds. Batman lost his parents when he was very young. He had to live in a cave and all this weird stuff. Joker also lost his parents when he was young, or didn't have any parents. And they had hardships, but the choice that they made to be a victim or a villain out of it, or a hero to not let anybody else feel pain. So Batman wants to protect the whole city. Joker wants everybody to feel his pain, right? Because he's felt that pain, life's been so unfair to him. So that kind of, the person that rises above everything, and the person that tries to, or sees everything as a victim mentality. What types of personalities you think are getting burned out more? Is there such a thing as different personalities doing different things with burnout?
Yes, absolutely. Professions where there is an element of serving people. So perhaps the Batmans of this world, right? Where you see a lot of lawyers that are constantly advocating, fighting on behalf of their client, experiencing vicarious trauma. So they're not only having the accumulation of the very intense workload, plus the emotional pressure, plus the vicarious trauma, plus the desire to really serve and really help. By the same token, the medical profession, many surgeons, many doctors also experience burnout. And interestingly enough, many therapists are burnt out too, right? So a lot of the professions where you have a deep-rooted desire to help and serve, because you can do it so much that you can overdo it and almost forget yourself in the process, because you're driven from that desire to constantly provide to others, and you can actually completely forget about your own basic self-care, right? So that's not uncommon. But you can also navigate or experience burnout and turn into a bit of a villain. And what I mean by that, and I don't want anyone to feel triggered by what I say, but burnout can bring the worst of you. And I'll include myself in that.
Yeah,
but
me too.
What I have seen firsthand in my client is, obviously I will share stories on a no-name basis, but I've had clients literally, can we swear on your podcast?
Of course you can swear.
Lose their shit,
Yeah,
just snap at their wife, snap at their children, right? Lose their temper, be their worst self, and actually be deeply disturbed or embarrassed by that behavior.
Of course,
right?
Of course, yeah.
Lose it with a colleague, have a complete temper outburst, an anger outburst. I've had clients for something quite insidious, being stuck in traffic and just losing it on the poor taxi driver, right? Or you're coming home and your wife has cooked for you and served you the dinner a few minutes late because she knew you had a Zoom appointment, and then you completely snap ungratefully because dinner was late. Right, that's happened to one of my clients. Instead of going into how grateful am I that my wife has provided this beautiful environment where I can eat before my next Zoom call. How dare you serve me 3 minutes late, right?
Yeah.
You can become the worst part of yourself, even vis-a-vis people you love most. And that's how burnout can play a huge part in marriage difficulties and even lead to divorces. The other thing that we need to talk about is burnout is not good for libido. So it's a complete sexual turnoff. Who wants to be intimate with someone who's just snapped at you? Who wants to be intimate with someone that just got into an anger outburst? Who wants to be intimate with someone who is absent, right? So that can not only affect the libido of the person who's navigating burnout, because frankly, the last thing they think of is that, because they don't have time, right? A lot of my clients say, I don't have time or even energy to think about it, let alone do it. I don't have time.
and you also get I guess you get the extreme cases where people have coping mechanisms, right? So when they're stressed, they eat. When they're stressed, they want to have sex. When they're stressed, they want to go do something adventurous.
Of course.
And then that goes into a really deep rabbit hole sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. But it can really affect your most intimate relationship. And then it affects your joie de vivre, that little spark. Very often, my clients describe being burnout as that numbness, and that's where it can very much look and feel and sound like depression, because where everything is a bit gray, right?
I've been
Life has lost its brightness, and it's almost as if you're navigating a black and white movie and you're going through the motion, and it's not as bright and exciting and colorful as it used to be. And what's interesting about the burnout cycle is that because you don't have the energy or willpower or even think about doing the things that you love to do, you almost forget about them. And you not only don't do them, but you forget what they were in the first place.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, a recent example is after finishing a massive deal, the biggest deal of my life, I celebrated and went to the Maldives with the whole family. And we were there for about 2 weeks. And I remember my first week, I was like I was being tortured. And I feel so guilty for saying that, because it's such a special place to go to. Not everybody gets to go. It's very hard to go there sometimes. And I was sitting there just feeling very, very guilty. Why am I stressed out? I'm in an island with 30 people. It's 300 meters squared. And all I've got to do is relax. Go fishing, sunbathe, eat whatever I want. I don't have to cook, I don't have to clean, none of that. And I remember feeling very guilty, and I had to have a lot of reflection. It took me a week to be able to actually start relaxing, to enjoy my holiday. What is that a sign of? Was I stressed?
Actually, this is really interesting. So that's a sign not only of stressors, but that's a key component of burnout. So 2 things. Number one is their primary negative emotions. So when I say negative, no emotion is really negative or positive by nature, but negative in terms of the consequences of the behavior that it leads you to act on, right? So sadness, hurt, anger, guilt, very common emotions. They can be leveraged into interesting emotions. So you can leverage guilt into prioritization, just making sure that you prioritize things that you want to do. You can leverage sadness into gratitude for what is actually making you sad. You can change those emotions and anger into energy. But very often when you're burnt out, you feel those emotions, and they're very acute, they're very intense, because the only way you know to deal with them is by allowing a behavior that is maladaptive. So that's one side of the equation, the emotional management, or rather the emotional landscape. But the other side of the equation, which I find most interesting, is what I call poor mind management. And I hope you don't mind me saying that, because I was very much guilty of poor mind management, and I'm happy to share the story of how I overcame this. But here's the typical example, and that fits in so well to your story about the Maldives, is I love to ask, and maybe I ask you, have you ever found yourself working, daydreaming about next time you'll be off? You kind of have those intrusive thoughts where you're working, but you just, your mind is going to where you're going to be, or you're thinking about, oh yeah, I should be at home. You have this inner voice within your head, like kind of nudging you and making you feel guilty.
Maybe I have I felt slightly different to that. I'm maybe one of the rare cases where I really love what I do. And because of that, I tend to go too deep and I spend too long doing it. And I think because a lot of the times as well, when I'm not traveling, going all over the place, I like to be at home as much as possible. So I work from home, which really messes with my mind.
Sure.
Because I'm doing something so intense, but I'm in my house, and then I walk out of that door, I'm in my house. So it's very confusing.
It is.
So I've never, well, of course I've had jobs before where I've had terrible jobs when I was starting out, where I'll just be dreaming of a different life, of my weekend. I can't wait until it's Friday, that big celebration when Friday comes. But that kind of stopped in the last kind of 10 years. I've really enjoyed what I've been doing, but I worked too hard at it. And there was a lot of, side effects from that. Does that fit, or it doesn't fit?
It does.
Yeah?
Yes, absolutely. And it's only natural then that you would experience the guilt when you're not working, because not only do you do it intensely, as it sounds like you're doing it intensely, but you also love it, right? Yeah. So then it's hard to feel the guilt. But what guilt is poor mind management, because the guilt only happens when you're not fully present in the thing that you're doing right now. Yeah. So if you're in the Maldives with your family and you're feeling guilty about not working, that emotion can only exist in your mind if it exists and lives with the fact that you're thinking about work, right? Because guilt can only come from, what else could I be doing instead? Or what are the things that I haven't been doing? If you're completely immersed in the moment, fully present, anchored into all your senses, into the experience of being with your loved one, focusing on their sound, focusing on what you see, focusing on what you feel, guilt cannot live in that moment. Yeah. Guilt is actually a creation of the mind, because you're comparing the current moment and the current action with something that doesn't exist and is not there. That's guilt. So, mom guilt, dad guilt is you working and thinking, oh, I should be with my child. And then when you're with your child, thinking, oh, I should be working. So what you're doing in those two things is you're not 100% present in the action you are implementing.
This is so key. So
key,
I have
right?
a lot of friends who own and run companies, or have positions of power in government, etc. And one thing that they kind of contradict themselves is, oh, as soon as I'm with my family, I think about work because I'm there to provide for my family. And they need my work in order to live a certain lifestyle and to have everything they need. But a really massive mistake I think a lot of people make, I used to make this mistake all the time, but I'm consciously making sure I don't make this mistake anymore, is, if somebody's talking to me, a loved one, my wife, my children, my friends, I'm not going to think about work. I'm going to focus on everything this person is doing and saying, the pores of their skin, how they dress, how they smell, because I want to be present in the moment. Because it's a massive gift to give that to someone. Yes. It's so easy to be there, halfway there, like the person's talking, you're thinking about something totally different. I don't know if you can't generalize women or men, but I think men do this especially. They tend to wander. After about 10, 20 seconds, when a topic has been brought up, they know it's going to be a long dialogue. They start going into other areas in their mind. And they just kind of sit there like a plant and listen. Right. How do people avoid that from happening? Because I think everybody does that. And it's actually a terrible mistake to make to somebody you love, right? You should be present. How can they be more present?
Well, not just somebody you love, but anyone you interact with. And I'm going to tell you a story that actually aligns with your story, and that's going to bring us into the topic of AI therapy and I think this is a fascinating way to bring it up, because active listening is at the core of what we most desire when it comes to, call it therapy, coaching, hypnotherapy, whatever it is, a protocol that is going to support one's mental health, right? So let me just rewind and explain the context. I was working with an associate who interacted with a partner, and when she walked into the partner's office, she wanted to bring up something really important, and the partner did not make eye contact at all, was just typing in the email, just allowed her to come in, so clearly invited her into his space, but continued to type and sort of listen without listening and continue to be deep in his email. And of course he was he was very busy. Can we really blame him? Have we not been that person? I have been that person, I'll be really honest.
Many times on the phone, everybody's on their phone talking to other people.
We've all done that. I've been this partner, right? But what she was sharing with him was really important, and it really bugged her, and she felt hurt and unheard and undervalued in that moment. Not that it was the first time, but it was the most significant time. And you know what she did? She went to ChatGPT and she had a conversation with ChatGPT about the interaction and about the thing that she wanted to be heard about. Well, actually, is this funny or is this sad? Or is it interesting?
It's a lot of things,
It's a lot of things. And what did she crave in that moment?
Uninterrupted, active listening and attention.
Yes, that's right. And that's the most attractive thing about AI therapy, because it raises the standards of human interaction. So I'm actually not scared of it or concerned about it. I just think that it showcases what we need most. If one interacts with a bot because they want undivided attention, that's what they want. That's what they need.
So really relevant story from my side on the same topic. I recently wrote an article for Wired magazine on the future of relationships. And through the study that I went through to write the article, I learned so many things around how people are using AI in order to talk to them for problems, but also to talk to an AI about, relationship type stuff. And something staggering, like 28% of people, different reports will say different numbers, but something like 28% of people having some form of intimate relationship with their AI. Talking to them about problems and relationships and, partners, and using it to vent out, etc. So it wasn't shocking, but the amount of people doing it shocked me as I studied it a little bit deeper. And I fully agree with you. I think the future of therapy is therapists augmented by AI, and also AI is doing it at the beginning, and when it gets really complicated, passing it off to a professional.
Yes, but also perhaps just distinguishing between therapeutic protocols and framework and therapeutic interaction. So what I find fascinating about psychology is that there are two main components. First, there is the protocol and the methodology and the framework, right? Be it CBT or NLP or clinical hypnotherapy, we use a framework, a protocol, almost like a formula in many ways, techniques. And as much as I would love to say, only we can do it, AI can't do it, that's simply not true. AI can actually follow protocols. And I've tested it myself. I'm a master NLP coach. I've asked Chat for a NLP timeline framework, and I was stunned. It was as good as what I learned from NLP master with 25 years experience. I'm not saying it's a replacement. I'm saying that AI can generate framework and protocols, right? Cool. So if we're using the sort of just the framework piece of therapy, that's one thing. But it's important to know the boundaries and the limitation. I think if we use AI for emotional support within the understanding that it's a protocol and a framework, that can be very helpful. But in my opinion, where the boundary should be and the line should be drawn is to then think of it as a human, right? To think that it replaces human interaction. And that's where I think
dangerous.
Potentially, right?
Yeah.
Because if we are pretending it's a human, that's where lines get blurred, and I have more of a challenge with it. If we accept the fact that it is not human and it's great at helping with protocols and framework, let's use it. Let's leverage it, right? That chat box is available at 3 a.m. with the best will in the world. I'm most often not available. Sometimes I am when I do burnout intervention, right? I have 3 a.m. calls, but there are times where I'm simply not available because I'm in another session with another client. So do I think it's great that my client has potential support within the chat box if that's going to give him or her or them relief of some sort? Yes. Is that potentially better than drowning their sorrow in whiskey and sleeping pills? Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had positive case studies where that interaction with an AI chat box has provided relief and the feeling of feeling better. What is the ultimate goal of therapy or clinical hypnotherapy or coaching is excellence, but also the feeling of feeling a bit better. And so the question really should be, did that make you feel a bit better? Was that helpful? Did that improve your quality of life? Right? So that's relevant to me. Now, the other reason why I actually think it's great, it's because it raises the standards. What do I mean by that? The more we have AI therapy, the more we need to be hyper creative and be the best in our field. So when I have a client that tells me they talk to their chat box, I know I've got to be a kick-ass coach. They have access to something else, right? Yeah. So what can I deliver that is beyond the framework and beyond the protocols? I can be creative. I can be intuitive. I can use movement. So what do I do in those moments? I say to my client, great, why don't we do a walk and talk? You know, it's a technique that's been used by Greek philosophers. We know that it works because when you're not looking at the person, but you're just side by side, people open up more. And I know that if they are in nature and they're walking with me, they're going to open up in a completely different way, right? So I will invite my client on more human interaction. As far as I know, just yet, you can't walk and talk with a computer. Just yet. You could take your phone and interact with the bot, right? But that notion of being human or integrating creative therapy, be it drawing your feeling, painting your emotional landscape, drawing your breath, using pen and paper, colors, paper, textile, having that sort of feeling, that kinesthetic. I do a lot more creative intervention than I ever did before because we need to raise the bar and we need to become more imaginative and more creative so that we're not just a supplement to another chat box.
Very true. The thing you said about AI elevating human standards, I think, is really important. Because, you know, sometimes you go to a therapist and they sleep in your session. They might sometimes forget what you said a couple of weeks ago.
Sure.
So, you know, having that AI assistant in that case, I think is very powerful because it's a perfect friend. It remembers everything you've said. It's got access to the world's information. And I think as well, being on top of the food chain as humans, you know, you do tend to get a bit of that king syndrome, right? Where it's, I'm the top of the world, nothing's better, you relax. And you stop pushing yourself because there's nothing really challenging you except for life and other humans.
Sure.
So now that, you know, one day, you know, with AGI is going to exist, it's predicted within the next 2 years. So it's very close and it's accelerating every year. And when that point comes, I think it's going to be really interesting, something that has more intellectual power than we have. So we're going to have to study harder. We're going to have to be more careful when we speak, how we react on our emotions, etc. Let's go into, I saw a statistic the other day. I don't know if it's true. Maybe you've come across it, that Gen Z workers, you know, which are coming into the workplace, the young workers, 20-year-old, they're burning out far quicker than other generations. And they're calling in sick more. What do you see there? Is there anything interesting going on there?
There is, yes, there is a lot to unpack there. We often call this generational conflict. And we see the Gen Z and what we call them, the Zoomer or
baby boomers and
the boomers and all of that. I think it's interesting that we find that they burn out more. I wonder if they're perhaps a lot more in touch with their mental well-being requirement, but also perhaps attempting to do so many different things at once. What we're seeing now is there is a big culture shift whereby there is much more incentives to become more entrepreneurial with the rise of podcasting and YouTubing and social media influencers. All of those are very attractive side hustles that you see a lot of new generation do, but that can also in many ways distract them or overwhelm them with the concurrent workload. So I have a specific example to give you here. I was working with a young trainee at a law firm, brilliant, very dedicated, very hardworking, but who was also in the midst of launching their own podcast as a side hustle to being a trainee in a top city law firm. Now, having been a trainee in a top city law firm, I find those potentially quite incompatible. Not that it should be incompatible. I'm very pro-entrepreneurial thinking, and I think it's wonderful that one would explore launching their podcast. So I don't want to say that's a bad idea, but what I'm saying is when you're committing to such an intense workload and you also have that deep-rooted desire to be an entrepreneur as a side hustle, that can propel you a little faster into the burnout, right?
Yeah.
So just seeing this interest, this outside interest, is a wonderful thing because I think it makes for a generation that's very well-rounded, that is full of ideas, that is very passionate, and it's wonderful to see Gen Z being multi-passionate, right? But there is a price to pay to that. If you're keeping up a very, very intense workload, plus intensely working at curating your side hustle, that may just mean that you don't have enough hours in the week for your rest and recovery, right? So it's just about being very intentional on what is your actual priority at this stage of your life, and perhaps just taking a step back and being really honest about how that can work. And if you really, really want to be a podcaster, perhaps, just perhaps, you may want to work at a regional firm, another city firm where the expectation is 90 to 100 hours a week, right? So you need to be really smart, because if you want to do both, which I think is wonderful, then you may have a think about how can I actually do both and not run myself into the ground. In my opinion, if you're committing to a city law firm or a city investment bank, working on your side hustle at the same time is perhaps
tough.
Just a tough thing to do, and to do in a way that is going to be excellent, right?
So I got a circle of friends of mine. Whenever I'm going to do a podcast, I tell them about the guest and what kind of questions would they have. They're quite interesting people. And a lot of them kind of actually, not even one, was all of them. They popped up and said, no such thing as work-life balance. There's no such thing. The reason why we're unhappy is because we're aiming for this balance, and this balance doesn't exist. So what's your thoughts on it? Does it really exist? Is it a dream? Should we be aiming for work-life balance?
I think the word balance is actually really unrealistic and can be very triggering. I believe more in work-life integration, and I really believe in value-based living. So what do I mean by that? I think auditing your values are really important, and having a very clear notion on which are your work ethics-based value and which are your work-life values, and when do you fulfill those values. Because if you're thinking about work and life in a mathematical equation, or if I spend 75 hours working, I should therefore spend X amount of hours on my personal life, it's not only unrealistic, but it's actually going to make you feel like you're setting yourself up for failure. Instead, I like to take a step back and have more of a holistic view on what are my key values and how do I embody them. In other words, what is one action or one behavior that display that I'm living congruently with that specific value. So I'll give you a personal life example. Romance is one of my highest value for my personal life, because I'm French, maybe. And
you said it, not me.
But I don't measure it in terms of number of hours. I measure it in terms of intentional embodiment with my partner. So I messed that up in my first marriage. I wasn't congruent with my values, but I'm pleased to say that now I really live up that value. So it doesn't mean that because I've worked 8 hours, I need to be romantic for 8 hours. That's completely mad and unrealistic. And if that's balance, well, then my life is not balanced. But instead, I've had a fully dedicated day serving my clients, which is congruent with my value of leadership and being of service and helping others. And then I'll be fully present for what we still call date night after years and years of a committed relationship, where I will be fully embodied in my value of being the most romantic partner that I can be, being funny, being playful, being vulnerable, and all those things. And it's not measured in hours. So if balance means mathematical equations, I think then it's something that is not really helpful. But instead, if we thrive for value integration and actually auditing values that are important to you, right? Another one is health. I didn't even have health on my radar. I didn't. Well, no one who does have health as their highest value would do what they did to themselves back when I was working. I completely destroyed my health. So health couldn't possibly be a value. But guess what? I didn't even realize that health was a value. It was not really something I was conscious of. So when I did my audit and my map, I thought, hey, let's look at my life. Where's health? Oh, it's not on my map. Wow. Well, no wonder I'm doing nothing towards my health. Now that health is one of my primary value, not only in terms of helping my clients with theirs, but also constantly optimizing mine, I make sure that every day I do 1 to 3 things. I don't measure it in hours, actions and behaviors that are congruent with my value health. So what does that mean in concrete terms? I go for a run, I meditate at night, and I eat really healthy food. That's how I embody health. So to me, it's not about balance. It's about integration and auditing your highest value and living in a way that is congruent with those values.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand it. It's just, equal hours for fun, equal hours for work, and it's just not possible, right?
It's not possible.
So can burnout be a good thing, in your opinion? And in which cases?
Of course it can. It's one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. If it wasn't for my burnout, which I wasn't aware of until I saw my father go through it, I wouldn't have become a clinical hypnotherapist. I wouldn't have set up my company. I wouldn't have gone to India. When I was talking about mind management, the first time ever that I learned about mind management was when I lived in an ashram.
Yeah, India is definitely next. This is the next topic I want to get into deep.
Sure. Burnout shakes you to the core, right? So burnout can be wonderful if you draw the lessons from it. Burnout can be devastating. It cost me a marriage, health, and I still live with some of the symptoms. When you have been navigating being insomniac for so many years as I have, you will live with that, right? It's not something I can ever forget. And for the rest of my life, I would have to take very specific measures and behavior, knowing that I work with that past. So I know I have to be extra careful around my sleep hygiene, and I need extra measures. And also because I have burnt out, I know that I'm more prone to burning out again, because it's a personality trait, right? If you've burnt out once, you can burn out again. So there is burnout recovery, which is one aspect, but there is also burnout prevention. And that's the maintenance phase, because too often I've seen clients cycle from burnout 1 to burnout 2 to burnout 3 to catastrophic burnout.
Horrible, yeah.
Right? So to answer your question is, can burnout be a good thing? Yes, if you learn from it and make some serious lifestyle adjustments.
So there is, you've probably heard of the company NVIDIA. One of the most valuable companies on earth now. Went up 3,000% in the last couple of years. And the CEO is a CEO I respect a lot, Jensen. And he's very famous for saying that he wishes a tremendous amounts of pain on people, because it's that theory of, to become a diamond, you need immense pressure to become a diamond in the first place, right? Pressure makes rough diamonds into beautiful, sparkling diamonds, that kind of idea. Which, by the way, is technically not true, because when you find a diamond, it's rough and you have to polish it and to make it shiny. But anyway, let's not destroy that analogy. What's your thoughts around this? Leaders who are promoting people to just go to the edge. People like Elon Musk, he's very famous for that.
Yeah, well, but again, when you listen to his interviews, he will say that he hasn't slept for years, and that at some point it did cost him some aspects of his personal well-being, right? Yeah. Even though he's an advocate for super hard work, he says that he has sacrificed sleep and well-being in many moments of his life. Look, I think there are seasons, and I think hard work is great, and I think it's fantastic to be driven and ambitious, but I also think that it's quite important to manage it in terms of understanding when you go into performance decline. So if I had one message that I would love to advocate for everyone, is work up until the point where you see performance improve. If you are working and you're noticing that performance is declining, or it's getting harder and harder to performing at the same level because you're overtired, because you're hangover, because you become dependent to pills, because you just got a divorce, because you're in back pain, because your neck is tense, and you're working against this huge force, be it burnout, being anything else, that is costing you performance decline, that's when you really need to interrogate and investigate what you're doing, right? To me, the true measure is performance. I'm obsessed with performance, and performance doesn't lie. Are you performing better or worse than last year, last month, 10 years ago? Really, the curve should be upwards, or maybe stable. But if you're seeing that it's declining, then there is a need for an intervention. Same with health. Of course, we're aging, so there is an element. One could argue that the health curve is going to go down a little bit with aging, although biohackers would say you can reverse aging, but that's perhaps a different conversation. But if you're seeing a serious drop in your overall vitality, energy level, health, behavior, then that's when you need to really question your ways of working.
Really good advice. I think one thing that's really important that people understand is well-being is not really, and avoiding burnout is not about sitting on a sofa doing nothing and just taking it easy, totally chill pill. It's about understanding that nothing happens in your comfort zone, and there is a very small, a bit, when you leave Earth, there is a hemisphere before you get to space. There's a certain angle, there's a specific space you need to be in order to grow. Yes. And that's what you're trying to get across to people. There is a place you can be to have the highest performance. And if you don't manage that carefully, you can very easily go into the wrong angle and burn out, like people, rockets can go into space, or you just end up going back to your comfort zone and not growing at all. Right? And I guess your role in people's lives, in coaching them is so important, because you maintain them in that little space where it's not too much and it's not too little either. It's just that place you need for growth. Is that a fair description?
Absolutely, it's spot on. And it's also just looking at, again, that aspect of not over measuring success with intellectual achievement alone. Because if you are achieving and performing, but you are riddled with chronic pain, it was my case. I remember there was a day where I was walking into the law firm and I genuinely could not stand on my feet because I was in such back pain. Not like a little pain, just complete pain. When I blacked out, in a taxi, not because I was drunk or had taken any substances. I was completely sober. I was coming out of the office. I blacked out from sleep deprivation, complete exhaustion, chronic anxiety, and like my brain shut off.
Wow.
When you haven't slept for that long, your brain will shut off, right? And I wasn't even aware. Like I remember not really thinking about time of the day or food, or refraining from drinking water in the office because I thought, oh, it's going to take me 3.5 minutes to take a return trip to the bathroom. And instead I could be billing.
Oh my God, you're avoiding toilet breaks to
Yes.
become more efficient.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, stay dehydrated so that I wouldn't have to, well, think about it, right? It's a long time if you're billing by minute increments.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not a performance mindset, because we know that hydration is connected to your brain, and your brain needs hydration to function. So to me, it's not just about the workload. My workload right now is very intense. I mean, you know, I literally landed from Sydney last night, and I'm here the following morning doing a podcast, and I'm going into coaching. But I've taken really key measures to look after my health that I would not have taken before. I've done self-hypnosis on the plane. I've done meditation. I've modulated my light exposure to mimic sunset and sunrise. I've been very diligent about the way I would eat and the time I would eat to respect my natural feeding window so that I wouldn't feel jet lagged. I've prepared for it 48 hours before the plane. I would not have done any of that before. I would have just thrown myself into work, eaten whatever, drank whatever, taken whatever, and just carried on. But you need to actually treat yourself like an elite performer. You need to think of yourself like an athlete. Would an athlete behave that way the day before the performance at the Olympics? If the answer is no, why should you do it before your board meeting?
Yeah.
Performance is performance.
So all of this, you know, the burnout you had, you know, passing out in the taxi, seeing what happened to your dad, etc., that took you to India. Can you guide us through that journey?
Well, yes, there were a few steps. I didn't quite go from the taxi to India, but almost. Yes, I really needed to go into this, you know, that expression, tabula rasa. I needed to really shift things to the core. And I took extreme measures. Now, I want to be very mindful that I am not advocating that everyone should quit their job and go to an ashram. Not at all, far from. Yeah. I actually, you know, my measure of success when I work with clients is to make sure that they can continue to do what they love. So I just want to be clear that I don't think what I did is what is needed. But in my case, I needed a complete reset and a complete reboot, and I needed to be shaken. I wanted something extreme because the feelings I was navigating were extreme. So I decided to actually do something that was the polar opposite to everything that I had done. I was a litigator, so I used, you know, my power of speech, my words, my intelligence, my intellect, not my movement, not my body a whole lot, and certainly not my power of being silent. So I thought, okay, what is the exact opposite to being a lawyer or a litigator in
who
this
sells
environment?
by the time, right, that you're speaking and doing things for clients.
Yes. And I thought, well, you know, I liked yoga at that point in my life. Not that I did a whole lot of it because I never made the time. But I had tons of books on the subject, and I had never been to India, and I was fascinated. I thought, you know, I just want to be in a different environment. I was listening a lot to Tony Robbins at the time, and he's a very big advocate of immersion, you know, putting yourself in that immersive experience and doing it fully. And I was such an work addict, that I knew I needed an extreme circumstance that would not provide me with the temptation of work. So a bit like when you're navigating, recovering from alcoholism, you would go to rehab. In many ways, the ashram was my work rehab, because I knew that if I lived there with monks, there was no laptop or Wi-Fi or phones. We had our phone, but they were not really, we were not really supposed to be using them. We had them in case of an emergency or anything like that. And it was such a humbling experience, you know, just going to an ashram and living there without status. it's not like I had a business card or a special kind of power. I was having a human experience with other human. We didn't wear shoes. We were sat down for hours meditating. The hardest part for me was the silence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you use your words to make a living and to help people and to serve, it's really hard to be silent. And my yoga teacher told me something really fascinating. Well, we call them guru. I know it sounds very spiritual, but he said to him, you know, that burnout was very hard for him to grasp. But he said, well, you've constantly been overdoing and you've been under being. Just thinking being. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that we actually constantly do, achieve and be productive. But when you lean into, when I'm present, what is the inner dialogue? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? And you actually learn techniques to manage your mind. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful. And it was hard, really humbling. Mm-hmm. But if it wasn't for that experience, I don't think I could have leveraged my mind to be able to serve others at such high level. That's where I learned the importance of silence, which I use in coaching. I know that a lot of my clients tell me I have, you know, an intense gaze or a very intense power of just being actively listening. That's something that I learned in India. I already had some of those skills as a lawyer, but I took them to the next level. And if you have a strong mind, you have a stronger life, really. And what I didn't realize is that my prior pursuit of intellectual achievement didn't actually lead to mind management excellence. I was intellectually in a great space, but my mind was shattered and going into dark places. And anxiety is also because your mind is going into catastrophic thinking. Anxiety is the result of all the stress and the stressors and the psychological and physiological symptoms of that, right? If you learn to manage your mind, you really don't feel as anxious. I didn't take medication to manage my anxiety. I went to India and learned meditation. That's how I became a meditation teacher. And then I was so fascinated by the mind, I wanted to take that further and further. And that's how I leaned into yoga nidra and meditation, and it led me all the way to clinical hypnotherapy.
Amazing. Any other places that you went to apart from India to get that kind of knowledge that you have today? I think you went to Lapland once to hunt.
Yes,
is that right?
Yes. Well, a very different experience, more in the biohacking field. I think it's important to, leverage ancestral wisdom, which I learned from India, Nepal as well. I did some meditation technique with the Babas there. I also lived in Indonesia for nearly 1 year in total, in Bali and other places where I actually became a trained yoga teacher. So I just wanted to supplement the physical aspect to my mental aspect of well-being. Now I've traveled a lot to the States to learn from some of the best in the primal health coaching field, and Europe as well. And I like to always challenge, and I like to consider myself an everyday learner. I know less today than I will tomorrow, and I love that, and that's the way it should be. So just a constant quest of how can I optimize myself in a way that will also serve others. That's what I'm looking for. And what I love most is using tools, understanding their effect on me, and passing them on to help the next person. And I think that you need to have done the work, the dirty work, the healing work, to then be an ambassador and advocate for others. If it wasn't for my burnout and my struggles with anxiety and insomnia and being a workaholic, I don't think that I could hold the compassionate space that I hold for my clients now.
Beautiful. And I guess one of the most beautiful things you've said is just the more you know, the less you know, right? It's just being a life student is probably one of the best ways to live your life. Just keep learning. Don't close your mind. Just on the last topic, what do you think the future holds? Technology is everywhere. People are talking to their AIs, having less relationships, not having kids. People are playing less sports. The world's getting into a pretty funny place. Where do you think, mindfulness, taking care of your health is going in the future? Is it going to be all tech-driven? Is the technology aspects of health going to cause other problems in the future as well? Mm-hmm. Just to close on that, I think that's a really important topic because it is imminent. It's happening already.
Of course.
And it's only going to accelerate.
I think it's there. It's undeniable. I love to leverage tech where I can. So I'm actually pro using technology. I have my Garmin here. I'm not promoting any particular brand. I'm just saying because of my past difficulties with sleep, I love to use devices to track and monitor my sleep, but I also love to not use them. In other words, I think it's important to use them, but not over-rely, to then go into cycles of natural sleep or natural runs. So another way that I use tech is I love to use tech to monitor my heart rate when I'm going on a run and listening to podcasts, but I also think that sometimes it's quite nice to have an experience that is immersive in nature with no podcast, with no Apple Watch or whatever you're using. And so it's that notion of, can tech help with your mental health? Of course it can. There's so many apps now, a hypnosis app that you can listen to. I'm a big fan of easy meditation. What I mean by that is 10 minutes at the back of a taxi, 30 minutes in a plane like I did yesterday. Just meditation on the go, not waiting for it to be this mystical spiritual experience, which is quite hard to have in a corporate environment. So can tech help? Yes. But can tech take us into a world where we're feeling more burnout? Most definitely. A big component of burnout is overexposure to screens and losing touch with our natural environment, nature, without sounding too whimsical or woo-woo. It is so fundamental that we step away from our computers and step into nature and be exposed to the environment. And I'm a huge fan of being exposed to cold, to heat, going to the sauna, going to the hammam, going into cold immersion, going into natural exposure, because we live in a very convenient and very comfortable environment. I was very guilty of that back when I was a lawyer. And one thing that I learned in India and along my travels across the world is to become accustomed to the feeling of being uncomfortable and to thrive from it, because that's where resilience grows. And tech can here potentially be a hindrance because tech makes our life overly convenient, right? Instant delivery, instant gratification, instant notification. So we need to, as tech evolves and becomes omnipresent, we need to go elsewhere to challenge ourselves in deeper, bigger, meaningful ways. So I think there will be a bit of a split between those who, over rely on tech and perhaps struggle with becoming weaker physically and physiologically and psychologically, and those who will leverage tech, know where it can be helpful, know where the line needs to be drawn, and actually will expose themselves to become superhuman by becoming more resilient.
Yeah, beautiful. So learn to be the master of your tech, not let tech master you.
Exactly.
What are the two last thoughts you want to leave listeners with? The two biggest things, if you're on your deathbed and you're telling your cousins or somebody, what they should do with their life, in terms of two principles that you want them to follow. It could be three as well. What would those be?
Yes, I think the first principle is, as much as you want to accumulate a lot of wealth and you want to be successful, I would love to invite you to think about the fact that the only thing one wants when they lose their health is more health, right? I've never heard somebody navigating a diagnosis and think about work or career or money. When you're unhealthy and unwell and very sick, the only thing you can think of is your health. So I would love to invite you or even urge you to prevent having this catastrophic diagnosis. And if you know that you're doing things right now that are paving the way to getting a bit closer to that catastrophic diagnosis, just please don't wait for that event to happen. Just reroute. You can reroute, you can reset, you can recalibrate, and you don't have to go and live in an ashram to do it. You can bring the ashram to you and learn little pieces. That's the first thing. And the second thing that I would like to leave as a question, and that's a question that's fundamentally helped shape my second life in a way. I like to think of my life as, life part 1 and life part 2, is am I setting a path whereby I'm going to survive my success? Are you going to survive your success if you continue to do what you do? In other words, are you potentially facing an early or premature death because of your patterns and lifestyle? I know it's morbid, but I think we should put survive and success, the two words, together, closer, a bit more often. And if we think, am I going to survive my success, it becomes a lot more meaningful. Because if you're very, very successful, but you drop dead early.
Yeah. What's the point? Very, very wise advice. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from this conversation, and many people will start making life choices which are different as well. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.